a quick transition to a civilian government, a promise it would fail to keep. To the contrary, it would kill hundreds of thousands of youth across Ethiopia to hold its grip on power, leaving an unforgettable mark in Ethiopia's modern history. For more, Salome Tigrai looks back.
Isra Gumbot, or May 28th, marks the overthrow of the Derg, a military junta that ruled Ethiopia and Eritrea with an iron fist for some 17 years. Derg, officially the Provisional Military Administrative Council, PMAC, was established in 1974 as the coordinating committee of the armed forces, police, and territorial army by officers and was initially led by Colonel Mengistu Haile-Mariam. On the 12th of September 1974, the Derg would overthrow the Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie amidst nationwide protests to establish a military government.
ዛሬ መስከረም 2 ቀን 1967 ዓመተ ምህረት ጀምሮ ቀዳማዊ ኃይለ ሥላሴ ከስልጣናቸው ወርደዋል። ህዝቡ ህጋዊ እንደራሴዎቹን መርጦ ህገ መንግስቱ ሲታወጅና መንግስቱ ሲቋቋም ድረስ ወታደራዊው ደርግ የመንግስቱን ስልጣን ይዞ አገሪቱን ይመራል። ይህ አዋጅ እስከጸናበት ድረስ ኢትዮጵያ ትቅደም የሚለውን ዓላማ የመቃወም አድማ የሚያደርግ ስራ የሚያቆም ያለ ፈቃድ ሰላማዊ ሰልፍና ስብሰባ የማድረግ በጠቅላላው የህዝቡን ጸጥታና ሰላም የሚነሳ ተግባር መፈጸም ክልክል ነው።
The Derg was initially split into two, with one faction led by the temporary chairman of the PMAC, Mengistu Haile-Mariam, and an opposing faction allied against him. These differences would later be resolved through the assassination of 58 high-level Derg officials in February of 1977. This would be the start of a dark period in Ethiopia's modern history, where assassinations became the most apparent means through which political differences are resolved. Unafraid by the prospects, Ethiopian youth, led mostly by Ethiopia's People's Revolutionary Party, a party of more than 4 million members, would present formidable opposition to the military junta. The EPRP was a modern political party that was formed in 1972, mainly aimed at banishing feudalism in Ethiopia and overthrowing monarchical rule. The Derg responded to challenges by revolutionary groups such as the EPRP and activists that resisted its control of the state with the declaration of the infamous Red Terror. The Red Terror was a violent campaign against political opponents and was carried out between 1976 and 1978 in urban areas across Ethiopia, leading to the death of a minimum of 10,000 people. The declaration of Red Terror in the then revolutionary square in Addis Ababa would not sugarcoat the intentions of Mengistu Haile-Mariam. He would declare death to counter-revolutionaries and smash a bottle that contained red liquid. EPRP members would be the main targets of the first wave of the Red Terror. The EPRP would be crushed and forced to retreat to Tigray, but the killings would continue in the cities, with the Derg turning on Mason, a political organization made up of intellectuals that had chosen to cooperate with and support the Derg. The Red Terror brought an end to any explicit opposition activity through extrajudicial killings, torture, series of massacres, and abductions, terrorizing a generation into silence. Signs on the streets of some of the major cities across the country would read that the Red Terror would succeed and engulf the whole nation. Bodies would be left on the streets for days. Families of victims told they would pay with their lives if they were to attempt to pick them up. At one point during the campaign, when authorities found it exceedingly impossible to fund their campaign of terror, they would require families to pay for the price of the bullet in exchange for the bodies of their children. Tens of thousands were tortured using a technique known as wafelala, where hands of the targets would be tied together with their feet and would be suspended from a horizontal plane, with body parts rich in nerve endings, including soles, palms, and genitals, were bitten with sticks or electric cables. Other forms of torture included rape and other forms of sexual violence. But even before the start of the Red Terror, a revolution was brewing in Tigray. The Tigrayan people knew that the regime had no intention of democratizing the state or allowing the peoples of Ethiopia the right to learn or govern their own language. So, when famine brewed its ugly head in Tigray in 1980, the Derg would take it as an opportunity to squash the revolution by using aid as a weapon of war. According to the United Nations, the famine of the 1980s would lead to the death of 1 million people.
Dawn, and as the sun breaks through the piercing chill of night on the plain outside Korum, it lights up a biblical famine, now in the 20th century. This place, say workers here, is the closest thing to hell on earth.
ኣብ ልዕሊኡስ ዘመቻ ይዳልወና ኣሎ እምበር ተደሪቑ ሓመድና ለሓሰ ዝኸይድ ህዝቢ ብነፈርትና ኸድካ ትቕጥቅጦ
Like most things, the brutal rule of the Derg too had to come to an end. In May of 1991, the Ethiopia People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, EPRDF, would overthrow the Derg and put into place a constitution that accommodated Ethiopia's cultural as well as political diversity.
The fall of the Derg in 1991 would bring it a new and much brighter chapter in Ethiopia's history. For the first time, Ethiopians from all across the political spectrum would meet in the same hall to discuss the country's political future, ending a deadly cycle of war and destruction as a form of resolving political differences. One of the greatest achievements of that time would be the ramification of Ethiopia's constitution that, for the first time in Ethiopian history, recognized the right of the people to write, speak, and govern in their languages, but also allowed for a multi-party system. For more, Saran Zagai.
31 years ago today, Ethiopia's People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, a coalition of 4 political entities that had been leading the armed resistance against the ruthless military junta, the Derg, would enter Addis Ababa.
On the 27th, Acting President Tesfaye Gebre Kidan told us the Ethiopian army had virtually disintegrated and that he and senior government officials were extremely concerned about their ability to provide for law and order. The acting president said that the government intended to broadcast a call for a unilateral ceasefire and an appeal to the citizens of Addis to accept the EPRDF when they entered the capital. The EPRDF decided to move into the city that night. The United States agreed with that decision because the EPRDF was now left as the only disciplined force capable of keeping order in the capital. At that point, the Addis regime effectively ceased to exist.
This new chapter in Ethiopian history would be unique in that, for the first time in the country's history, there was an attempt to be inclusive and engage communities as well as political entities with varying political ideologies. For the first time in the country's history, politicians advocating for independence or a multinational arrangement would sit side by side with those advocating for the return of Ethiopia's monarchy, unimaginable just months before.
Our London meeting thus ended without the appointment of the transitional government as we had envisaged. But it ended with something perhaps even better. The insurgent groups themselves argued that a transitional government was not possible until more political factions were present and participating. In a joint statement, they themselves called for a meeting of a wider range of political parties and interests to establish a broadly based transitional government. This meeting is due to be held not later than July 1. So, despite the changed circumstances in which it was held, we really think the London meeting accomplished a great deal.
In July 1991, a national conference on peace and democracy was held in Addis Ababa, and the Transitional Period Charter of Ethiopia was adopted. The The charter stipulates the right to form political parties, independent judiciary, and right of nations and nationalities to administer their own affairs within their own territory, and so on. The transitional government of Ethiopia has begun the process of establishing a democratic and decentralized political system, and as a result, local and regional elections took place in June 1992. The transitional government consisted of several political parties already practicing the multi-party system.
There were about 85 members in the parliament, of whom only 30 were EPRDF. The remaining belonged to other parties. I remember one of them was the Gash Kifle Wadajo, who later on became the author of the Ethiopian Federal Constitution. He represented INDO, Ethiopian National Democratic Organization. There were guys like Nebiyu Samuel, who represented EDC, the Ethiopian Democratic Coalition. So there were a number of guys who partnered with the TPLF, the PRDF. And so the transition period more or less went smoothly. We were able to craft one of the best constitutions in the continent, the federal constitution that stands to be tested in history.
The transitional government would establish the Constitutional Commission that prepared a draft constitution to be discussed and ratified by the Transitional Council and representatives from localities around the country. The commission had the daunting task of designing a political arrangement that could accommodate the many divisive issues that had led the country to civil war and promised to cause even more devastation.
The commissioner, the head of the commission, was Gash Kifle Wadajo, and he honestly an honest statesman, respectable statesman who doesn't bend to any TPLF twist and turn. He stood by his position throughout the debate. I was a participant in the debate, even though I was not a commissioner. Taye Askasselase from Forum 84, he was there. He's now the ambassador of the UN. Dawit Johannes, who became later the Speaker of the House for a number of terms, he's an Amara. Tashoma Gawramariam, a lawyer, famous lawyer in Ethiopia, he was a member, he's an Amara. How come that the Amara elite says we were not represented? They were there, they wrote the federal constitution. And with honesty and integrity. They didn't make it Amara-like or Tigray-like or anybody-like. They made it look Ethiopia-like. Like nationalities, nations and nationalities.
The result was Ethiopia's current constitution, the Constitution of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. The constitution would establish a multinational arrangement that recognized the diversity of Ethiopian state and allowed all Ethiopians the right to learn, govern, and organize using their own language. The constitution also devoted more than 1/3 of its contents to provisions on fundamental human and people's rights, including freedom of speech and religion, gender equality, the right to speak, allowed for a multi-party system, and secured free and timely elections, all at first for Ethiopians.
Anyone can run for elections. Political parties can be established and present varying political ideologies. The people have a right to choose between different political ideologies and choose what they believe is right through a peaceful process, and this is because of the Constitution.
While the Constitution is unlikely to be free of fault, it was the first and most inclusive political process in the country's history, and will perhaps be the greatest achievement of the People's Revolution of 1991, a constitution whose fundamental principles were shattered when the Ethiopian government extended elections and sprang war on a people because they insisted on exercising the right to vote and elect their own government.
ፖለቲከኞች ስልጣን እንዲይዙ ወጣቶች ማለቅ፣ እናቶች ማልቀስ፣ ቤቶች መፍረስ፣ ህዝቦች መፈናቀል የለባቸው።
Women lacking access to medical professionals during birth can result in multiple health complications, including obstetric fistula, an academic rarity for much of the world, but a sad and unfortunate reality still for women in developing countries. Now, the director of the Hamlin Fistula Center in Mekelle says there is a rapid increase in fistula cases in Tigray. The director says this is largely as a result of the destruction of health facilities in Tigray, resulting in a significant decline in access to health care for women and children. For more, Sarah Kallali has this report.
The medical director at Hamlin Fistula Center in Mekelle, Dr. Malaco Abraha, says fistula cases in the region have shown a radical increase since the war erupted. The doctor attributed this sharp increase of fistula cases in Tigray to the destruction of more than 80% of health facilities in Tigray that has resulted in the decline of women's access to maternal care, with less than 30% of births in Tigray now being attended by health professionals. Dr. Malaco emphasized that the social demographic of women experiencing the condition has also changed, where previously cases were common only amongst poor and uneducated women or women from rural areas. Cases have now also become common in urban areas and amongst educated women. Obstetric fistula is a degrading condition in which women who suffer traumatizing labor are unable to control their urine and are often ostracized by their community. The Catherine Hamlin Fistula Center was founded by Dr. Catherine Hamlin, an Australian obstetrician and gynecologist who, along with her husband, founded the Hamlin Fistula Center in Ethiopia in 1974, the world's only medical center in the modern time dedicated exclusively to providing free obstetric fistula repair surgery to poor women suffering from childbirth injuries. The Hamlin Fistula Center in Mekelle, one of 5 in Ethiopia, was founded in 2006 and has so far given medical treatment to more than 4,500 women in and around Tigray. The medical director said that much of the work done to eradicate the fistula in Tigray since the center opened in 2006 has now been reversed, as medical facilities have very limited supplies to cope with the needs of pregnant women and lactating mothers.
The Ethiopian government has arrested additional 7 journalists over the past few days. The Committee for the Protection of Journalists had issued a statement on Tuesday following the arrest of close to 1,000 reporters in under a week. The arrest of these 7 additional journalists brings the total to 18 journalists, making it one of the largest crackdown on independent journalists since June of 2021, when the Ethiopian government arrested more than 12 journalists. The journalists include former Tigray television talk show host Yayesov Shimelis, Bakalu Alambro, a journalist for the YouTube-based Alpha TV, and many more. Earlier this month, the Ethiopian government had revoked the license of The Economist journalist Tom Gardner without any specific wrongdoings on the part of the journalist. Excuse me for the technical glitch. Forum of Civil Societies and Political Parties of Tigray issued a statement on Thursday calling on the international community to play its part in facilitating safe and unhindered humanitarian access into Tigray, including the proper classification of the crisis in Tigray as a famine. The forum also said that accountability for atrocities committed in Tigray would be an essential element of sustainable peace in the Horn. For more, Winta Kirana reports.
On Thursday, the The Forum of Civil Societies and Political Parties of Tigray issued a statement calling out the international community for its failure in properly classifying and responding to the humanitarian catastrophe in Tigray. The statement said Tigrayans are perishing as a result of the blockade on essential items and vital services by Abiy Ahmed, while the international community fails to call the crisis in Tigray for what it is, a famine. The forum said the classification of the crisis in Tigray as only famine-like conditions stands to belittle the suffering of the people of Tigray and extend their suffering. The forum also emphasized that accountability for atrocities committed in Tigray was essential to ensure sustainable peace in Ethiopia, and said that failing to address the issue of responsibility and focusing merely on the humanitarian situation is not the way to achieve sustainable peace in Ethiopia or the Horn. The forum called on the international community to play its part to ensure that the Ethiopian and Eritrean government are held accountable for their crimes in Tigray and ensure the safe and immediate delivery of humanitarian assistance into Tigray.
The year-long deadly siege that has been imposed on Tigray has further devastated the already collapsing health system of the region. Most hospitals in the region have run out of medical supplies and are unable to treat the many children, mothers, and elderly that are flowing through their doors. Our reporters met with children suffering from cancer at Eider Referral Hospital in Maqala, but have not been able to access health care for months. For more, Saran Zagay reports.
This is Qadista Barra, a 5-year-old cancer patient seeking for treatment in Eider Comprehensive Specialized Hospital. She has been admitted to the hospital months ago, but hasn't received any kind of treatment. Her father, Priest Abarra Mahari, says that it all began with a lump on the left side of her chest, which later spread into her stomach and caused the swelling.
It started in a lump in the left side of her chest. It then spread into her whole stomach, causing it to swell.
Abarra says due to lack of medicine, they have been told to wait in line without any solution for months.
There is no medicine. The doctors keep telling us to wait until medicine gets here in order to get a treatment. We have been going like this for more than a month.
Aaron Solomon and Filmon Tesfai are also cancer patients in Eider. Aaron came from Temben, Abiy Adi 5 months ago to get treatment. He says their access to treatment is pretty limited, as there is no medicine even in the hospital he has been referred to. On top of that, Aaron says there is no food.
It's been more than 5 months since I came here. I'm a cancer patient. I'm unable to get treatment as there is no medicine. To make things worse, we are not getting enough food.
Another patient, Filmon Tesfai, came here 7 months ago. He says it all started with a lump on his neck. He's also waiting in Eider Hospital to get treatment but unable due to lack of medication.
First it was a lump on my neck. I came here and they told me it was cancer. I haven't been able to get any kind of treatment. There is severe lack of medication here, so I am just sitting here doing nothing. I would have been in school by now if treatment was available on time.
The patients called on the international community to put pressure on the government of Ethiopia and its allies to allow the much-needed medical assistance into Tigray to save their lives.
The international community needs to stop watching from the sidelines and take action now. Time is running out. These children know nothing. They don't deserve to suffer like this. Please help save their innocent lives. The international community needs to help us. We need medicines to get treatment and save our lives.
That's it for this bulletin.